You're listening to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where dice hit the floor, paint gets spilled, and no game ever goes exactly as planned. I'm Grizzly, and here we dive headfirst into Warhammer, tabletop gaming, and the beautiful mess that is the hobby life. From epic crits to absolute disasters, we'll cover it all. So grab your minis, roll with me, and let's get reckless. Welcome back to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where we dive into all things Warhammer Age of Sigmar, from the epic lore and tabletop battles to the hobby desk and growing communities. I'm your host, Grizzly, and today we're taking a faction focus towards one of the most unique armies in all of the mortal realms, the Ossiarch Bonereapers. If you joined me last episode, we explored the Soul Wars and how Nagash unleashed the Necroquake across the realms. The Ossiarch Bonereapers are the direct result of that moment. The great necromancers attempt to create a perfect, disciplined army that would march to war in his name. Where other undead stumble forward as hordes, the Bonereapers are crafted as soldiers, engineered from bone and bound to absolute obedience through the Bone-Tithe, Nagash's grim taxation on the living. And I'll be upfront and honest with you, this is one of my favorite factions in the Deathgrant Alliance. They're just something about their design, the way they take the familiar imagery of the skeleton warriors and elevate it into a militaristic empire, with ranks of Mortek guard and towering constructs like the Gothizzar harvesters and Katakros himself leading from the front. They're equal parts eerie and majestic, and I think that makes them one of the most compelling armies in all of Age of Sigmar. In this episode, we're going to cover their story, where they came from, what makes them stand out from the other death armies, and how they fight on the battlefield. We'll talk about the standout models that define their look, break down their tabletop strengths and weaknesses, and take a look ahead at what the future might hold for Nagash's grand design. So whether you're a lore enthusiast, a hobbyist, or someone curious about picking up Ossiarch Bonereapers yourself, this is your guide to one of the most disciplined and terrifying armies in all of Age of Sigmar. The Ossiarch Bonereapers are Nagash's grand design, his attempt to build a perfect army, where the Soulblight rely on hunger and illusion, and the Nighthaunt are fueled by torment and despair. The Bonereapers are something entirely different. Soldiers, crafted from bone, engineered to fight with discipline, and bound by an empire-wide system of tribute known as the Bone-Tithe. The Bone-Tithe is one of the most chilling parts of their lore. When the Bonereapers arrive at a settlement, they present terms. A quota of bones that must be paid, whether from graveyards, ossuaries, or the living themselves. If the mortals meet the tithe, the Bonereapers can march on without raising a blade. In that sense, it's fair, but only in the most twisted way imaginable. Fail to meet the demand, and the Bonereapers will take what they are owed directly from your flesh. It's bureaucracy by way of genocide, and it sets them apart as something more than just another undead horde. What makes them unique is the Mortisans, Bone Shapers, who don't just raise the skeletons, they sculpt them. Using necromantic magic, they carve and craft bone like stone and steel, building warriors with reinforced armor plates, weapons, and constructs that look more like a deathly legion than a shambling mob. This gives the Bonereapers a sense of purpose and permanence, like they were meant to be here, an empire rising rather than a cursed lingering. And at the head of it all stands Katakros, the Mortarch of the Necropolis. Revived during the Soul Wars, Katakros isn't just a warlord. He's a general in the truest of senses, a master of logistics, discipline, and a military genius. His defining moment came at the Eightpoints, where he clashed with Archaon himself. That duel showed the mortal realms that the Ossiarch Bonereapers weren't just another one of Nagash's schemes. They were a force capable of standing toe-to-toe with the Ever-Chosen himself. But Katakros is not the only Mortarch tied to the Bonereapers. Archaon the Black, Nagash's oldest and most trusted of servants, also plays a role in their rise. Archaon is less of a battlefield commander and more of a dark architect, guiding the Mortisans and ensuring that Nagash's vision is carried out with ruthless precision. His presence reminds us that while Katakros represents discipline and military genius, Archaon represents continuity, the living link between Nagash's ancient empire and his new creation in the mortal realms. And Katakros' story didn't end at the Eightpoints. He launched a massive campaign known as the Siege of the Eightpoints, bringing the full weight of the Bonereapers' Legion against the Chaos's greatest stronghold. While the siege ultimately failed, as Archaon's dominion over the Eightpoints is near absolute, it proved something critical. The Ossiarch Bonereapers could wage war on a continental scale. They weren't raiders or opportunistic, they were empire builders, capable of constructing fortresses, establishing supply lines, and holding ground like a true military superpower. That sense of permanence, of death, carving out not just territory but infrastructure, makes them one of the most ambitious projects Nagash has ever unleashed. For me, that's why they're such a compelling faction. Between the cold fairness of the Bone-Tithe, the eerie craft of the Mortisans, and Archaon's guiding hand, and Katakros' vision of a military order, they stand apart from every other undead army. They're not just the dead brought back to fight again, they're death reimagined as an empire of bone and discipline, marching steadily towards the domination of the mortal realms. When it comes to the hobby side of the Ossiarch Bonereapers, I think it's one of the most striking armies of the entire range. Death armies in Age of Sigmar often lean into the shambling, gothic look of the skeletons and zombies, but Ossiarch Bonereapers break that mold. Their design is militaristic and disciplined, and almost alien in its symmetry, like an empire that was engineered rather than raised. Some of my favorite models in the entire game come from this range. Katakros himself is a centerpiece, unlike anything else in Warhammer. His model isn't just one figure, it's an entire diorama of attendants, banners, and advisors, each one telling part of his story of the Mortek of discipline and strategy. On the table or on the shelf, Katakros is one of those kids that just commands attention. And then, of course, there's Nagash, Supreme Lord of the Undead. While he is an Ossiarch Bone specific, his presence looms large over the army, both on lore and on the tabletop. Including him as a Bone Reaper in the Bonereapers collection can really tie the narrative together. The god who envisioned his legion standing alongside the creation itself. On the unit side, I think the Necropolis Stalkers and the Morghasts are some of the coolest models in the line. The Stalkers have this imposing, multi-faced look that makes them feel otherworldly, like warriors crafted for precision strikes. Morghasts, on the other hand, feel ancient and divine, soaring constructs that remind you these aren't just undead, they're echoes of Nagash's godhood given form. And finally, I can't skip over the Gothizzar Harvester. This model is peak Ossiarch weirdness. It's grotesque, it's alien, and yet it perfectly fits the Bone-Tithe theme. A machine that gathers up bones mid-battle and recycles them into fresh warriors. It's the kind of kit that really captures the creative side of Age of Sigmar's design, strange, unsettling, but absolutely unique. And of course, no Ossiarch Bonereaper army would be complete without the Mortek Guard. They're the backbone of the Bonereapers Legion. They're rank-and-file soldiers that embody everything this faction stands for. Their models strike their perfect balance of skeletal horror and disciplined military presence, marching in neat ranks with polished bone armor and deadly precision. For many hobbyists, the Mortek Guard are the first step into this faction. They really set the tone for an entire range. Painting them gives you the sense of an organized, relentless army, one that doesn't just shamble forward, but marches with purpose. Taken as a whole, the Ossiarch range has a consistent aesthetic that sets it apart. Clean lines, bone armor, eerie constructs, they don't look like corpses dragged from the ground. They look like an empire built from the remains of countless mortals. And I think as a hobbyist, that makes them an incredibly rewarding army to paint and display. On the tabletop, Ossiarch Bonereapers play exactly how they feel in the lore. Disciplined, methodical, and unstoppable. When their formation is intact, their defining mechanic in 4th edition is still Relentless Discipline, but the way it works now makes for a very different kind of decision making. Instead of stockpiling points, you're making phase-by-phase choices. At the start of your movement, charge, or combat phase, if you haven't already used one of your Relentless Discipline abilities, you can nominate a hero, and every Bonereaper unit, wholly within 12 inches of them, gains that effect. That means that the army revolves around positioning your heroes, like generals, giving orders across the line. Do you push your Mortek Guard forward with unstoppable advance, or save that ability to make your charges more reliable with coordinated charge? Do you grind harder in the melee with bludgeon for extra damage, or shore up your defenses with impenetrable ranks to make sure that your line never fails. Every phase is a trade-off, and it forces OBR players to think 2 steps ahead, something that fits perfectly with their theme or discipline and strategy. The units themselves reinforce this style. The Mortek Guard are the backbone, and with support, they can almost feel unmovable. Holding objectives while enemies crash against them, Necropolis Stalkers bring adaptability. Their ability to change stances gives them the flexibility to either hit harder or survive longer, depending on what you need. Morghasts are one of the few tools for speed, flying across the battlefield to threaten backlines or reinforce weak spots. Then you have the Gothizzar Harvester. It's one of the most thematic pieces of the whole range, both visually and mechanically, turning the bones of the fallen into more warriors to keep your ranks topped up. And then there's Katakros. On the table, he's less about raw damage and more about his control. His aura buffs nearly every part of your army, and when he's in play, your entire battle line becomes way more efficient, more resilient, and more terrifying to face. Losing them hurts, but if you keep him safe, he's the ultimate general, both in lore and in gameplay. To give you a picture of how this plays out in a real game, imagine this. Your Mortek Guard are dug in and on an objective, braced with impenetrable ranks, giving them the durability to weather any enemy charge. At the same time, your Necropolis Stalkers push forward under bludgeon, swinging harder and cutting down key threats. While that happens, a Gothizzar Harvester lurks behind your lines, recycling the bones of the fallen to restore your guard and make sure your position never breaks. Meanwhile, Morghasts circle in from the flanks to threaten the enemy's backfield. All of it tied together by a hero at the center, issuing the Relentless Discipline ability that makes the entire formation hum like a war machine. That's Ossiarch Bonereapers in action. A patient, grinding style that feels inevitable once the gears get going. Playing Ossiarch Bonereapers often feels like slowly turning a crank on a machine. Your opponent might outpace you in the early turns, but once your formation locks into place, it becomes harder and harder for them to break you. Every RD choice reinforces that sense of inevitability. Push here, defend there, grind forward. The army rewards patience, clean positioning, and a willingness to play the long game. The downside is clear too. If your heroes get sniped and you're forced to spread out too far, the whole engine starts to sputter. But when it works, the Bonereapers feel exactly like what they're meant to feel like. A deathless empire, marching forward without pause. So, what's next for the Ossiarch Bonereapers? In their lore, their future closely feels tied to Nagash. After the events of the Broken Realms and the Soul Wars, Nagash has been wounded, diminished, and driven back into hiding. Without their god at the forefront, it raises the question, what happens to the empire he built? Did the Mortarchs like Katakros and Archaon continue his vision faithfully, or do they start to shape it into something of their own? I think that's one of the most intriguing possibilities of this faction story moving forward. What do disciplined empire-building undead do when their masters aren't there to give them the next order? We've already seen that the Ossiarch builds fortresses, impose Bone-Tithe, and wage wars on a continental scale like the Eightpoints. That feels like groundwork for something bigger to move. Could we see them expand their presence across the mortal realms? Maybe even carve out territories like the rival Dawnbringer Crusades? And if Katakros ever returns to the forefront in the storyline, his war against Archaon could easily reignite, giving us another massive clash of order versus death versus chaos. On the tabletop side, I think the Ossiarch Bonereapers have a lot of room for evolution as 4th edition unfolds. Right now, their identity is very clear, durable, synergistic, and methodical. But I wouldn't be surprised if future updates expand their Mortisan angle, giving us new constructs or bone-forged units that push the faction even further into unique spaces between necromancy and military engineering. And of course, a new centerpiece kit, something on the scale of Katakros, or even a new Mortarch, would fit perfectly into their aesthetic and make a lot of hobbyists very happy. For me, what makes the Ossiarch Bonereapers so exciting is they aren't just an army, they're an empire in the waiting. Whether Nagash rises again in full strength, or as Mortarchs begin to write their own destinies, I think we're going to see the Bonereapers remain a major part of the mortal realms moving forward. Their story isn't finished, and in many ways, it only feels like it's just begun. And that's going to wrap things up for today's episode of Rolling Recklessly. We've walked through the lore of the Ossiarch Bonereapers, talked about their unique place in the Death's Grand Alliance, highlighted some of the coolest models on the range, and broken down how they fight on the tabletop. For me, they'll always stand out as one of the most compelling armies in all of Age of Sigmar. Disciplined, terrifying, and absolutely unique in a way that they bring the Bone-Tithe to life. Before I sign off, I want to take a moment and thank everyone who's been listening and subscribing. The show's grown so quickly in such a short amount of time that that's only because of your support. Whether you're tuning in on Spotify, YouTube, or Instagram, every download, comment, and message helps keep this podcast going, and I can't thank you enough for being part of it. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think about the Ossiarch Bonereapers? Have you played against them? Do you collect them? Do you think Katakros is the best of the Mortarks? Or is your loyalty with somebody else? Share your thoughts with me on Instagram at rolling_recklessly_podcast, or hop into the community Discord. The Discord is starting to grow at a place where we can share lists, hobby updates, or just hang out as a community of Age of Sigmar fans. And I'd love to see you there. Next episode, we'll be shifting gears. So make sure you're subscribed on Spotify and YouTube so don't miss it. And if you've been enjoying the show, leave a rating and review. It's one of the best ways you can help the podcast grow and reach more players out there in the mortal realms. Until next time, may your crits be high, your paint never dry, and your rolls ever reckless.